The world was a single light in the dark sea of the void. It had not fared well in the moments of darkness, and a rot had set in. All alone in the night, it quietly rebelled. And all ships that attempted landing were never seen again. Yet it was in the path of a fleet of a holy ward of the Adepta Sororitas. I do not heed the blessings anymore. More to put it, they do not trouble me as they once did. Once we were faithful to another, to the one God. But he abandoned us. In our time of need, he withdrew his light and left us stranded in the dark, where there were things, the tales of yesteryear, the legends from the cradle, but they were real, and they were here, and we were abandoned. They ate the clergy first, you see. Laughter and crunching echoing in the night. Screams often slid across our world as they gorged on us. They took one starter of our society after another. You would awake to find another inch off the top, another cull, another directed, very specific slaughter. We lived in fear. Dread is what the elders say. So when another light came, a new hope, we grabbed it with both hands. We turned our backs on the false god, and we worshipped the many. Was a tithe so different to our new mass blessings? It was worse, harsher, more costly. We would have entire generations' worth of toil ripped from our hands and taken into the stars. They came rarely, but they would always expect the coffers to be full, the silos to be overbrimming. And they were harsh if this was not the case. Once, in our long ago, a generation was skipped. They did not come. So our people thought they would never come again. We believed we were finally free. And we ate well. We built. We harvested and invested in ourselves, our culture, our world. Yet when they returned, there were no coffers. There were no stocks overbrimming. And instead they took half of our population. Half. Slaves, warriors, cattle, meat. We never knew their fate. But we learned then. They would never let go. We were theirs. No matter how long between visits, no matter how many of us died, our air choked, our crops diminished, no matter what sacrifice, they would take their fill. Our people had only just recovered to pre-tithe levels when the darkness fell upon us. So none of us begrudged these paltry numbers, those who maintained the blessings. It could be hard to watch. Unlucky if the wind changed and you were assailed by the stench. But you can look away, for those unaccustomed to such things. It only happens in the cities, the bigger gifts to the gods. Eventually, when you see the good that is being done by the blessings, you come to stop looking away, not feeling uncomfortable. You can view those who are honored. You can look in their eyes and say, for you I will continue feeling joy and more. You have given all of us a life we could never have dreamed of before. Freedom we could never have bought otherwise. Joys we could never have reached. It is a cost borne hard, but well, even so. The light from them can be blinding, the heat and sound overwhelming. I cannot admire them all, nor for too long at one time. We felt safe. We were living, not just existing, truly living, creating a utopia. It was worth the cost. I would have been honored to be a blessing. Not my ideal outcome, but it was worth it. Because the night was no longer to be feared. The price had been met. And it stopped. The night our lover again, not our enemy. The four had burned away the dark ones, replaced them with their own takers of blessings. And we thrived. We knew that all worlds should one day know the warmth of the blessings. But no ships arrived for generations. We celebrated, for the many gods had chased away the one. When new stars arrived in the night sky, our hearts sank. They had come. But it did not go as they had thought. They were lost. They were army men, soldiers. They landed in their vast numbers, gasping for fresh air, emaciated. They had been lost in the journey. We fed them. We kept them outside our cities by providing lavish tents, many of us serving. We fed them. We helped them. But when some of them snuck into our city, they were shocked. They prepared in the day. They moved in the night. Their huge columns of soldiers. They should not have done this. The takers of blessings were sent by the many, and they resumed their old dark and terrible forms. They fell on the columns of the Astra Militarum, went into their tents, where the too weak to mobilize were, appeared from shadows amongst the marching feet. Many were dragged under, many torn apart. Some were worn by the servants of the four. They signaled the surrender, and all who they commanded followed suit. They were ready to believe in something better. And very soon, when they felt the warmth of the gods, they were more ardent than even we. We were going to use their vessels, use these men and women, and spread the warmth of the gods, the blessings for this venture. They would be vast, and, being selfish, I wanted to witness them, and not directly contribute, or participate, so to put it. But this was merely due to the wish to see the spectacle, to bask in the light and heat. We were so close. That is when it happened. That is when it came. The Holy War. It was different this time. Instead of a few score stars in the sky, this time it was during the day, and it was not a few dozen. It was hundreds of them. They blotted out the light of the sun. A flyby of swift-moving fighters gave them full visual confirmation of what their ship's sensors must have already told them. The servants of the One had returned, and they were not looking for surplus or surfeit, stores or caches. The orbital bombardment was pointed, as much as it can be from a fleet. Yet somehow we knew, despite them glassing an entire island, leveling most of our capital cities, they were being restrained. The many put shields up around some cities, made people proof from their weapons in others. They tried. But the servants of the One began to arrive. They wanted this world. They would clean it. They were coming. I was attached to the main command, the liaison with the converted men who were once guardsmen of the tyrant. They called themselves veterans. They called themselves the best, the brightest, the brave. They burned with zeal. Yet the command was pandemonium as soon as contact filled their screens and scopes. They began to fire up, barked orders and activating turrets and nests. Burning lights and anger belched into the skies. Yet so few of the enemy conveyances spouted smoke, let alone fell from the skies. As they got closer, I stepped outside of the tent. Some ghastly urge brought me out to witness it. I could not help myself. It was the exact same urge as I felt when I witnessed the blessings. I could not look away, for this, I felt, was another blessing, another cost, like of old. But this time I was horrified, for this was to be done in the name of the One, and he knows nor shows any pity or mercy. Worse, he had sent his wives, his handmaidens. They were fury incarnate. I could see inside. I could see our lines struck, our units becoming non-responsive. It was all so fast, so fast. These were legendary guardsmen, the elite of the universe, yet they were falling like children before the force of their attacker. They were here. I saw them first. I was looking into the skies. I somehow knew. My hand cupped over my eyes, giving me shade. They were in a perfect circle as they descended. Two, as they came out of the sky, the sun behind them. It was almost beautiful. Then the sound hit, the thrusters, the jump packs, and the men around me started to die, messily. The snap of their terrible pistols, then immediately followed by a soldier exploding nearby, limbs severed, heads popping. It was horrific. The men tried to muster, to regain cohesion. It was the Commissar, the one with the red eyes despite having no obvious implants. His voice seemed to boom around me, but never strike me directly. The men ranked and fired up, but order was smashed again when our first 3 volleys in quick succession rebounded. We burnt a few, but so few. Their armor gave contempt to our meager lasfire unless the men concentrated them down. The handmaidens landed, their pistols blazing, but they did so in 2 circles, as I said. Large ones. There must have been 100 of them if a one. 50 fired outward, forming a perimeter, cutting into any units trying to support us. The inner circle fired into our massed ranks mercilessly. They were swift despite their armor, advancing unpredictably, yet so professionally as to angle their armor to its fullest. This is when I had to roll back into the tent. I could see out, but I was far from the edge. The boots of the Commissar passed me on his way outside with many an officer in tow. But it was horrific. These silver-clad armoured warriors were all women, all handmaidens, all lethality given form by a spiteful and vengeful god, and they could not be stopped. The ones in the first wave had kept everyone pinned or pulverized, but now the butchery began in earnest. The Zephyrim arrived. These had bolt pistols in one hand, but the carnage came from their right. They had power swords there, keen-edged and ancient blades with fields of energy around them. Able to cut armor and steel as though it were only bone and blood, they came down from above as well. But they landed right in the middle of knots of men and women and tore them apart. Bolter eruptions, limbs flopping, decapitations rolling, blood everywhere. They were mad, for not once did they speak, none of them. Not when they burnt a man with hand flamers, his body crawling for a few moments while covering burning promethium. Not when they were struck or bled themselves. They could. We heard when they created a second push and redoubled their assault. So many died. Yet the Commissar held his own. More than that, he was blessed by the many. The 4 were guiding his blade, I'm sure of it. For he alone stood against the fanatics, cutting down everyone. He danced between them, striding until the last. Then a burst of energy from his blade, a swift step or 10. He cut them down with effort, not ease, but he went through more than 4 before the next event dragged my eyes up the road towards its source. I felt rumbling, the sound of heavy treads on roads. Our reinforcements had been only seconds away. A column we were about to embark on. Lehman Russ tanks appeared, rolling up, but before them were our Ogrins. The outer and inner lines of the first wave of warrior women now peeled back. They retreated before the approaching slab-shielded Ogryn lines. All the while, the front tanks fired their battle cannons at the fleeing seraphim. But it was then that I realized it was over. Utterly. I could not see how anything could stop them. For there were these handmaidens, these silvered sisters. They had huge war suits, twice the height of a man, it seemed. They were inside them. The Ogryn received shots, and the precision was such that hails of bolter fire was used to push their shields back or to the side. Then the war-suited women would finish them with heavy bolter fire. Yet even as the tanks attempted to take aim on them, melter shot came from the superiors of each triad of these sisters, and the front tanks were disabled and heated and collapsed in upon themselves. At the head of this rampage was an especially ornate and impressive set of armor, with an equally impressive person within. The Ogryn charge she met head-on, and she created a carpet of dead as she moved through them. Her mighty spear going through shield, arm, and body behind, she fired missiles from her shoulders, and more Demon Rust tanks in the second ranks burned or exploded. The ranks of suits slammed into the last of the Ogryn and finished them off, yet their leader stopped. She looked around briefly, then snapped out orders.
Forked assault pattern. Sisters to my right, flank hard. Sweep away the rabble along with the last units of traitors. Sisters to my left, likewise, but keep your eyes on those towers. Sisters to my fore, push around the tank formation. Take them all. In the name of the God Emperor! I will deal with this last issue, then join you. There is more to this than meets the eye.
And there he stood. The commissar grinned at her as he stood in a circle of dead sisters. Each had their throats slit, their eye guards punctured, slain in precise ways that bypassed their power armor. Only one was taken piecemeal. The commissar stood transfixed. His eyes glowed red, his power sword field a musky red in hue also. As he made no sign of moving, even though his opponent stood in full warsuit battle plate. Insanity. The High Lord, the Sister of Battle, so youthful in face, yet old as the mountains in spirit, lunged forward and struck. She unleashed a wave of Sanctorum missiles from her warsuit, Purgator Miribalis. They flew to their target and tore him apart, the hat of the commissar floating down onto a wrecked shell. But this is when Vahl crunched her feet into the dirt, hardening her position. This was due to the spectral energies that now floated from the dead commissar. Lambent energies that swirled and coalesced into the form of a huge demon. The High Lord sneered, spat, and then charged. The being summoned a vorpal blade and parried the first of her strikes, its skill exceptional. The two were a whirlwind of blows, each parried and countered with such speed and force that sparks cascaded from them like a waterfall. Finally, the demon struck down with a mighty overhead blow, the first opening it had made. Out of frustration, it seemed, incredulous that any mortal could match its skill. Of course. It was then, as its blade passed over her shoulder and into the ground, as Morven Vahl sidestepped and angled to avoid, she then took her sacred spear, the Lance of Illumination, and performed a lunging strike directly into the demon's heart.
The Emperor protects, and he avenges!
The blade point pierced its flesh and sank in deep. Then a light burned from within the demon, crashing over its skin, and beams of white light shone out of its eyes. As the demon then turned to mist and dust specks, its power broken, it was undone and banished from this realm. The High Lord looked at its dissipation and merely nodded. To anyone else, this would have been a feat never to be surpassed, a glory unbound. To the High Lord, it was just another battle, another victory in the name of the one, of her God Emperor. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and organizations of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. And today, we shall be looking into one of the most elite shock assault forces that the Emperor commands. They suffer not a whit to live, screaming down from on high, bolt pistols blazing, as they arrive at the very heart of the thickest combat. Yet their power armor, astonishing skill, and utter conviction make their impact similar to a high explosive impact. For the enemy are dashed and gunned down before ever they can capitalize on their numbers. Now, this description may conjure images of Black Templars or Blood Angels, or perhaps the Sons of the Ras, landing via drop pod, or by jump pack. Yet, I must say thee nay. For today, we shall be discussing that most aggressive, yet stern and taciturn chamber militant of the Adepta Sororitas, the Order Majoris known as the Order of the Argent Shroud. It is an illustrious order, and must be championed as possibly the most elite non-gene-enhanced shock troops in the Imperium. Though I am sure that some might mention Kasakin, the Elysium drop troops, or the Tempestus Scions. For the latter at least are also fellow alumni of the Schola Progenium. They survived the same drill abbots, the same rabidly dogmatic and insanely harsh regime. Yet the Order of the Argent Shroud, like all Adepta Sororitas of the Order's militant, are armed and armored in truly sacred vestments, protected by power armor, given use of Holy Bolter. Though, of course, these are smaller bolters than would be found in the armories of the Astartes, the Space Marines. And today, we shall also be discussing the recently elevated High Lord of Terra, mandate given by the Lord Commander himself, the Primarch of the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, Reboot Guilliman himself. This in itself is important, and something of a departure from what one could expect from a Lord of the Crusade, a son of the Emperor. Yet we should get to that. Now again, everyone may believe there is a boatload of art out there, but alas, I must confirm that I cannot agree. Hence, I will be using stock sister art where there is not enough specifically for the Argent Shroud. Better visuals are always a boon. My apologies. And so, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. From the 9th edition Codex. To quote, "The Order of the Argent Shroud. The Silver Spearhead. Like a silver bolt, the Sisters of the Argent Shroud strike at the Emperor's enemies. They are renowned for their speed in combat, and are often first into the fray, where their faith in their protector saint shines bright. The matriarch of the Argent Shroud is Sylvana, first martyred and most mysterious of Dominica's bodyguard. Her service as head of the order was brief. Shortly after Alicia Dominica had founded the Order of the Ebon Chalice, the remaining Sisters of the Covenant Prioris were placed under Sylvana's command, but Sylvana was struck down before launching a single war of faith. The most reliable records concurred that a death cult assassin poisoned her, although these accounts vary wildly in their speculations as to motive. Some suggest the murderer was an agent still loyal to Vandire's vision of the ecclesiarchy, whereas others propose that the forces of the heretical Alpha Legion played a hand in the fell deed. The Sisters of the Argent Shroud hold that it was Dominica whom the assassin had attempted to slay, and Sylvana had sacrificed herself in order to save the Emperor's chosen one. This is in keeping with her character, for on numerous occasions she had placed herself in harm's way to protect the least of her allies. The Journal of Ecclesiarch Alexis the 22nd relates that while Sylvana's body was laid in state within the inner sanctum of the Covenant Prioris, after 7 days it mysteriously vanished. Only a silver image of her bones was left, imprinted on her death shroud, and it is from this treasured relic that her order received its name. The Order of the Argent Shroud teaches that deeds have more power than words when it comes to purifying the spirit and purging the taint of corruption from the Imperium. This belief is derived from the example of Sylvana, whose acts of bravery and faithfulness were well recorded during the Age of Apostasy. Yet not a single word spoken by her is recorded in any surviving transcript from the time. Her sisters emulate this by speaking very little, and by entering long periods of complete silence whenever they engage in training. This limitation of speech does not preclude them from prayer or worship. Unlike the members of other orders, they still chant hymns of wrathful purgation as they march into battle. But the Sisters of the Argent Shroud believe that it is more righteous to provide their service to the God Emperor than it is to ask for his holy favor. They avoid formulating grand stratagems and rarely communicate intended tactics to their allies, to the ire of many imperial generals. Simply put, the Order places its trust in the divine guidance of the Emperor more than in the carefully orchestrated plans of his fallible servants. The results achieved by the Argent Shroud soon put pay to any misgivings. Spearheads of silver-clad warriors race towards teeming Xenos throngs, and invasion cathedrals hurtle onto worlds rising with chaos energy. With swift surges, the Sororitas smash through defensive formations of far larger armies, destroying monstrous artillery batteries stationed behind the front lines and permanently silencing the demagoguery of heretical enemy commanders. Lightning-fast assaults are followed by rapid withdrawals, and as the foe reels in confusion, the Sisters of the Argent Shroud reform and strike again. By committing themselves so boldly to these offensives, the warriors of the Argent Shroud often leave themselves cut off from support, surrounded and outgunned. But it is in such dire circumstances that their faith shines brightest. Filled with divine conviction, the Sororitas fight against impossible odds, standing strong amidst the carnage as they drop their foes one by one, knowing that Sylvana watches over them in battle. Those systems who fall often save their entire squad from annihilation with their dying action, throwing themselves into the line of fire just as their matriarch would have done. Due to their propensity for hit-and-run assaults, the Sisters of the Argent Shroud have some of the deadliest and most experienced shock troopers of all the Adepta Sororitas. Many of the Order's commanders boast large contingents of Dominion squads, who are deployed en masse to break through the defensive lines of unsuspecting enemies, or are sent in small numbers to infiltrate fortresses, macro bunkers, and command centers in hostile territory. These Dominions are also leaders in many of the Order's rites of worship, their prayers on the battlefield often being the first intoned before being echoed by the other sisters. A peculiarity amongst the Order of the Argent Shroud lies with how they treat their dead. Where the members of other orders cry out when a comrade is slain, reciting prayers to guide the fallen soul to the Emperor and oaths of holy vengeance against the enemy, the Sisters of the Argent Shroud say not a word. Amongst their ranks, death is met with silence. Certain ecclesiastical scholars attribute this to a belief within the Order that martyrdom is a luxury, a reprieve from sacred duty, that should only come when there are no more enemies left to slay. Yet the dead Sororitas are still handled with great care and solemnity after the fighting has finished. The martyrs are removed from the battlefield in somber procession, their wounds cleaned and dressed, their armor repaired and polished, and they are laid to rest for 7 days in the sanctuary in which they served. After that, the bodies are removed, though what becomes of them after this point is not known outside of the Order. The majority of the Argent Shroud sanctuaries lie in the region of space that abuts the jagged mass of warp storms known as the Great Rift. During the Noctis Eterna, when chaos energies were blasted across the galaxy and the light of the Holy Astronomicon was temporarily extinguished, many of those sanctuary worlds were thought lost. Screaming maelstroms enveloped entire sub-parishes, while countless other worlds under the Order's watch were bathed in the warping glow of the Cicatrix Maledictum. In the harrowing years since, the Order has continued to fight against the marauding Chaos forces without showing any signs of diminishment. The Sororitas appear without warning in raging war zones along the breadth of the Great Rift, striking with crippling speed at their unprepared enemies. Multiple preceptories that were thought lost have since been seen in battle, and though they say nothing of the fates of their sanctuary worlds, they fight with unmatched hatred against the servants of the Dark Gods. End quote. Ah, the Sisters of Battle, the mighty Order of the Argent Shroud, silent and stoic in the face of hardship, yet rising in hymnal and prayer when required. Theirs is a pathway so similar to the Astartes, so close as to be haunting. For these are mere mortal warriors, not augmented immortals of war. They can tire, they can feel fear, they are but fallible humans. Yet their training, that incredibly brutal childhood and adolescence in the Skoda that will put any Spartan regime to shame, it has given them almost as much determination as their Space Marine allies. Almost. Yet there is something that the Marines, with all of their superiority in size, speed, endurance, and sheer power, do not have. They do not have faith. Even the warrior monks of the Astartes, the Black Templars, cannot be said to love and obey the Emperor as much as these, for the hidden truth is that the Sisters of the Argent Shroud do not have that taint. They are not warp-forged spawn, and it is believed that all Astartes have that tiny slither of their Primarch inside their veins, and that tiny slither contains a canker, a worm of warp heritage. Thus it is that the Sisters of Battle are actually that which they claim to be. In a universe of hyperbole, strutting, egotism and pandering, they truly are pure. For they do not suffer mutants, witches, or any form of deviation from the human norm. In past editions, different iterations, the Sisters of Battle deemed the Marines to be mutants, abominations that they only tolerated due to their being forged by their god Emperor. Well, we know this is no longer the case if you have listened to either my rendition of, or read yourself, The Rising Storm. For Black Templar and Sister of Battle fought side by side, shoulder to shoulder, against the power of Chaos and Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. And it is right that they do so really, for both are seen as wings of the same Aquila. The Ordo Marius has the Grey Knights, the Ordo Xenos has the Death Watch, and the Ordo Hereticus has the Sisters of Battle. But more often than not, they also call on the support of the Black Templars. For few other Marines are actually ardent believers in the divinity of the God Emperor as well. Now some might scoff, as I have done at times, for the Sisters come down on wings of fire, jump packs firing, bolt pistols roaring, as we have stated before. Inside the game, they may not seem so dangerous. Even the Zephyrim, who make up their armory with power swords, nasty. Yet in the game, sometimes they just bounce off. But in the lore, in the fluff, in the world we all agree to darkly dream, these are bolt pistols, firing armored piercing high explosive rounds that slice through most protections like they are not even there, blowing chunks out of monsters and making fountains of blood and explosions of offal out of normal-sized humanoid enemies. Power swords that can cut through steel like a scythe through wheat, chainsaws that drag themselves through the target if struck. Then they can reposition swiftly, taking to the skies again on their jump packs. So much like Marines. Yet, we return to faith. For the Sisters are not as mighty on the impact as the Astartes, yet it is undeniable that the Emperor is with them. For strange, impossible miracles happen in the greater numbers by the day. The psychic awakening, the opening of the Great Rift. It has brought forth powers that would previously had been fancy. Holy auras stopping weapons of terrible destruction penetrating armor. curses of the warp thrown back on their wielders, impossible bursts of speed, strength and accuracy, and more. For the hymnals of the most ardent sisters can inspire as much as a preacher. And from their prayers, the nature of reality itself can be denied as much as by any servant of Tzeentch, yet nary is the warp touched by any of them. For their faith in the Emperor is all that is required to initiate such miracles. It is that the Emperor himself, who now hears his daughter's cries, his own power augmented by the new age, or is it something else? Is it the response of a nascent new god, a being that is what the faithful believe to be the Emperor? But yet, it is not. Only time will tell. In any case, no matter the reason, the effect is clear. The Sisters of the Argent Shroud, like many of the Adepta, can call upon the protection of their god, and his wonders can tip the scales of battle again and again. Yet let us now hear about the most important member of the Order, or one who was at the least. For now, she has risen to the most sublime of pinnacles within the Imperium, her title given to her by order of Reboot Guilliman, the Avenging Sun. Let us now hear more about Morvenn Vahl. To quote, Morvenn Vahl, Abbess Sanctorum of the Adepta Sororitas. Spiritual and military leadership of the Adepta Sororitas is vested in Morvenn Vahl, the recently elevated Abbess Sanctorum. By her uncompromising command is the might of the Order's militant unleashed to scour worlds clean with the fire of her aggressive piety. Vahl does not direct such crusades from afar, but plunges into battle at the forefront of the fight. Morvenn Vahl issues her directives in clipped and severe tones, her young features always set in an expression of stern resolve. Her strident devotion to the God Emperor and the defense of the Imperium is beyond question, and she is the beacon to which the entire sisterhood looks as their spiritual and military exemplar. Vahl is a warrior first and foremost. She is a superlative frontline commander and expert combatant. However, she must be more than this, for a galaxy-spanning force awaits her every order, and the guardianship of the faith of mankind is in her hands. These are heavy burdens to bear. Rather than a mark of honor, the heirs of St. Dominica consider the position of abbess to be the highest of duties and responsibilities, one to be borne with stoicism, rigid devotion, and humble acceptance. The former abbess's ship was declared lost en route from Ophelia 7 to Holy Terra, during the anarchic cataclysm when the Great Rift split the Imperium. News of this dire loss was achingly slow to reach the wider Adepta Sororitas, for amidst such galactic unrest, every order and far-flung mission was on its own, maintaining their isolated devotion in the face of encroaching madness. Only as the darkness began to recede was the terrible loss uncovered. The need for an icon of leadership was greater than ever, and the ecclesiarchy appealed to the Convent Sanctorum and Priores to submit their candidate for abbess. Amongst those considered, Vahl was by far the youngest. She was an aggressive and selfless Celestian superior of the Order of the Argent Shroud, whose dedication in the face of monstrous onslaughts had earned her the approval of her somber order. The complex factions within the ecclesiarchical palace on Terra believed that so young and politically inexperienced a sister might be more easily maneuvered. Her expected naivety would be a gateway for the ecclesiarchy to exert more influence into the sisters' operations and internal hierarchies than convention dictated. What many with the ecclesiarch's ear wanted was a ceremonial and malleable figurehead. What they got was a forthright and iron-willed warrior. Morvenn Vahl was on campaign in the Rescard Purgation when the ecclesiarchy's delegation arrived. The priest delivered the Ministerum's declaration with ostentatious ceremony and layered ritual. Scarred and blood-stained, her silver armor chipped and far blackened. Celestian Superior Vahl listened in absolute silence and without emotion to the elaborate ceremony of appointment, couched in terms of mere invitation. She then stunned the congregated bishops, prelates, hierarchs and confessors by quietly requesting a period of prayer on the matter. Vahl entered her mission's shrine to Saint Sylvana and undertook a solitary meditation for 3 days, while increasingly nervous priests paced anxiously. When she emerged, she seemed to those present to walk toward her, her eyes hard and unreadable to the clergy, some of whom involuntarily backed away from her. With a handful of words, Vahl accepted the appointment. She commended a successor to her canoness, before turning on her heel and striding swiftly from the priest's orbital transfer ship. Having planned many days of worship and ceremony to mark the appointment, the gathered priests were aghast. Only a handful had the presence of mind to hasten in her wake. In the months after her arrival upon Holy Terra, Vahl soon proved herself a dreadful opponent to those who sought to control her. She continued to wear full battle armor when receiving senior members of the Holy Synod, intimidating and unnerving them with her pitiless stare and brusque responses. Vahl threw herself into re-establishing personal contact with as many orders as possible, firmly defecting any priests who tried to assure her that matters were already in hand. She sought to satisfy the orders that the Abbess Sanctorum once more stood as their commander, absorbing data on their current crusades, demanding field reports and strategic dispositions, and ascertaining what they were doing to throw back the flood of impious savagery that boiled out of the Great Rift. It was expected that Vahl, young as she was, and propelled so suddenly to the rarefied heights of power, must have wrestled with questions of faith and self-confidence. Yet whatever struggles took place behind the doors of her mind remained private. Not once did the new Abbess Sanctorum allow even a crack to show in the armor of her faith. It did become clear, however, that Vahl chafed at the reins of what she saw as a personal inaction, when so many other sisters of battle were fighting and dying. Even when, upon the recommendation of Reboot Guilliman, Vahl was elevated to the status of High Lord of Terra, it did little to cool her ardor for battle. Few within the Adepta Sororitas were surprised when the abbess declared herself the commander of the Ecclesiarch's crusade against the traitorous trade worlds of the Philosopher's Belt. Since then, she has taken to the field in person dozens of times during her short tenure, leading forces of every order majoris. Not given to rousing sermons and uplifting oratory, Abbess Vahl instead leads by example on the battlefield, letting her deeds and service to the God Emperor speak for her. Numerous senior sisters from several orders, Dialogus and Famulus, complement Vahl's command staff, deftly dealing with the slew of generals, planetary governors, admirals and more that daily clamour for her attention. Morven Vahl does not see herself as the Emperor's chosen, but as an instrument of defence who must place herself between the Imperial Creed and the countless horrors that seek to defile it. Her sense of duty to this lofty position means she will never recklessly submit herself to an unwinnable war. Martyrdom, as her former order taught, is a release from one's duty, and not its ultimate expression. As all her predecessors understood, the position of Abbess Sanctorum is a burden that could be set aside only when the last heretic, mutant Xenos and demon is expunged from existence. Only then might she step back into an anonymity as a sister of her order. The Panoply of Faith. When an Abbess Sanctorum leads an army of the Adepta Sororitas, she takes up the weapons and armor kept reverently aside for her personal use. Few throughout the millennia have borne these sacred relics to war, and none as often as Morven Vahl. The ancient Paragon warsuit, Purgator Mirabilis, is the most powerful and finely crafted of its kind. The Fabricator General of Mars, in Millennium 37, poured the resources of his own forged temples for 2 centuries into its restoration, before gifting it to the Adepta Sororitas for the salvation of the fallen forge world of Gen Korra. Its holy spirit responds only to the most pious and battle-hardened of the Emperor's servants. The suit's pilot launches righteous volleys of deadly missiles from shoulder guards inscribed with verses from the Fede Imperialis, while the underslung heavy bolter Fidelis pronounces its lethal sentence upon scores of faithless heretics. The embossed gun shield, marked with the names of the 2 convents over which the abbess has authority, is said to shine with the Emperor's own light, throwing back the hateful spite of unbelievers and twisted monstrosities. From the reliquaries of the Imperial Palace, the golden custodies of the Emperor presented Morvenn Vahl with the Lance of Illumination. Only the Adepta's custodies know its true legacy and import. It is said that a day even darker than those which blight the Imperium now will need the Lance's enlightenment. If the Adepta's custodies shared such terrible knowledge with the abbess, the notoriously taciturn Vahl has kept it to herself. Taken from the 9th edition Codex. End quote. Now this is a strange, very welcome change in pace. All of it. For the High Lords of Terra, I shall explain in more detail very soon. But her advancement to that august body is a move I would never have expected or predicted. I am not as versed in the newest novels as many, but have been keeping my eyes on the expansions as usual, codices of course, and I find it all striking very odd indeed. She was promoted to bring some fire to the High Lords, not that they would have known this, but Reboot to raise a religious order to the highest executive body, the Senatorum Imperialis, the High Lords of Terra, or to confirm it, at the very least, as they have had their time in the big chair before. It is just odd. The Primarchs were conditioned with the imperial truth, the belief there were no gods, no deities, no demons. All the while the Emperor, of course, was well aware of their existence. But Reboot has also been noted to show such disdain for the Imperium, and especially the imperial cult, the ecclesiarchy, and the faith entire. The belief that the Emperor is a god. Quite the upset. Nor is it anything but amusing that the High Lord who was chosen for her youth and her potential malleability has been a thorn in many sides. But the irony of it is that by absenting herself from the Council in Holy Wars, she has negated her own influence over the greater Imperium, trading it for more direct authority and example over the Sisters of Battle by being out there on the battlefields. Yet has Reboot done anything differently? He has returned from his long slumber, then hurled himself out on possibly the most important crusade since the original. To be discussed at another time, perhaps. But it can be no coincidence that the more martial he makes his inner circle, the more likely he is to be accepted and followed. But no general worth his salt would accept the glory of being a logistics genius, the architect of others' victories. Not when they could gain the laurels by performing the feats themselves. Is Reboot attempting to stack the High Lords with warriors, those of his own kind, people more direct, people he can potentially order or awe into his willed course of action? Or is he attempting to bring order to the High Lords by having another pair of eyes, another veteran on that august body who can bring the reality of the front, the pain of the wars, into the light of day? Inform those closeted on Terra what horrors their decisions unleash on their people, what tyranny they perform out of pure arrogance and complacency. Who can tell? But one thing is certain. Even the order of a Primarch may be ignored and questioned by one with a will of ages. And in this warrior of faith, Morven Vahl, of the Order of the Argent Shroud, perhaps even the Lord Commander, may have met his match. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you are intent on adding to your collections, then please do peruse our affiliate links. And, well, get a discount while giving us a hand. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.